has another commitment to go to, so he has till 6:30. And I hope that should be hopefully a good amount of time for you to kind of dialogue with him. I wanted to say a few words about Russ. I've known Russ for many years, and I've been involved with a lot of political things, and educational things. And from my heart, this man is an honest man. He is not a career politician. You know, we want to send someone to Washington who has, you know, the heart and the intelligence to help drain that swamp. I think a lot of us have seen more than we ever thought we would like to hear about what's going on in Washington. It's very disturbing. There's a lot of corruption, and I think from when I grew up to what I see now, it's just unbelievable to me the way things are. And we really, really need a man that can support what needs to get done and get that swamp drained and be honest and true. And this is a man who has business experience, worked with Micron nationally and internationally. His technical background, marketing background, he's been a state senator for many years in Idaho. And while he was a state senator, he was still a real estate developer, so a businessman. But this is a man not only is honest, who's going to, you know, stand for conservative principles, he also knows how to work with people to get good solutions and innovative solutions, and to help create competitive workforce. His position on immigration, very solid, in wanting to have legal immigration and people that come to this economy to add, not detract. And so enough about me. I just genuinely hope you will be supportive of him. I think he is going. I know he's going to be the next congressman. So I'd like to introduce you Russ Fulcher.
Just a special thank you to Lorna. We were talking briefly when you were coming in. I think the very first time that I met Lorna was I was on the Senate Education Committee, and of course we had met before, but we were starting the committee hearing, and all of a sudden the lights dimmed, and a robot starts rolling down the aisleway into the Senate hearing room. And then the robot starts talking to us, okay? And it became incredibly clear that the robot's IQ was greater than the collective IQ of all of the senators. And then when Lorna stood up and started to talk, it was really clear that her IQ was greater than the robot and all of the senators there. So anyway, I appreciate you so much, and I respect you so much, and what you do, and the impact you have on this community and with this school. And when we're thinking about a venue or to just try to do something like this, I thought if we can do this at the STEM Academy, that would be perfect, because I support school choice. I support science, technology, engineering, math, and I know the impact that has. And I also support Lorna and what she does and her efforts in trying to proliferate that around the state. So anyway, just thank you for being here. I know that it's a cold, wet night, and you probably have other things that you may rather do than be here. But I see a lot of friends here, and what I'd like to do is just kind of set things up a little bit, and then just hopefully just talk with you and get some counsel from you. And I definitely have the attitude that there's no monopoly on wisdom, okay? And I have positions, and most of those are really well known, and if you ever want to check about who I am or where I stand on different things, I've got hundreds of thousands of votes on just about every issue you can check out. But so just with a quick setup, and then I just want to open some things up. But I think I recognize most of you, but for those that I don't, quick background. I've got deep roots in this state, and it comes from the Meridian area, and my family on both sides have been in that area for more than 100 years. And believe it or not, there used to be dairy farms here because I was a dairy farm kid. And after about the 92nd time I got popped in the head with a poopy tail, I decided, you know what, I'm going to college. And so I did. And there was this little startup called Micron Technology that was that was where I got kind of started in the tech sector and whatnot. And I met my wife there. She was was one of the startup people as well as myself. And so a wife of 30 years and got 3 fabulous adult children now. And just those memories and experiences that come with being part of a startup. And Micron, of course, now is a multi-billion-dollar company with tens of thousands of employees around the world. But when I was there, we were struggling, and we were trying to keep things going basically out of a very small building. We had 3 customers. Nobody had ever heard of them, and of course, there was no possibility they would succeed, okay? One of them was this, they had a funny name called Apple. And we had something in common. Nobody would sell to them, and nobody would buy from us. And so we did business with these guys called Apple Computer when they were about the size that we were. And so that history goes way back. We had 2 other customers, neither of which did survive, at least long term. That was Atari, if you remember them, and Commodore. So if you names of like Jobs and Wozniak and Jack Tramiel, Nolan Bushnell, those were the people that I had the privilege of interacting with in those very early days, just trying to get some things going. But the Micron years turned out to be a very influential time for me. And it was not that I was particularly good, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I was one of the first international people, and over the course of 20-some years, mostly with Micron, with another company as well, they put me in about 47 different countries around the world in all 50 states. And when you do that, and you work with different governments in different cultures, in different education systems, you get an appreciation for America, and you get an appreciation for Idaho. And so that's just a quick backdrop on legislation. So with that, I'm going to segue to a very brief story that hopefully will tie some of this together. It was in those Micron years in 1998 that we needed a European presence. We needed a physical European presence, and we had to have that because you have to have local content to avoid some of the VAT tax and have manufacturing on the continent. So we were looking for a facility, and it was part of my job to help find that. And we did find one in Folfontein, Belgium. And it was a state-of-the-art boiler manufacturing facility in Belgium. The assets at that time were valued well over $500 million. And we negotiated a deal. And that deal was to buy that factory for $1 US. And we did. But you might ask, basically, why would a company give a factory away? The answer is that recently, prior to that, the government of Belgium had put in place a social program, a mandatory insurance program, a mandatory on employers, a coverage program that was so onerous that the existing employer chose to walk away instead of keep that facility. But there was a loophole for a new buyer, and that loophole was that we didn't have to keep everybody. And frankly, we wanted to keep everybody because there was good employees here. But if we would have been in the exact same situation. So that was how we got a footprint on the European continent. So fast forward now to 2012. I'm a state senator in the state of Idaho, and I'm leading the charge against the Obamacare exchange. And that's why, folks. Because what had transpired in Belgium was there was a version of that being imposed upon Americans. And so I share that story just to mention that experience does matter, and being involved with those types of things does have an impact. After those years in the tech world, I was in the United States, the state Senate for 10 years. And among the things that were very, very important to me that I was involved with, of course, the issue of life. I ran probably more life bills, pro-life bills, than anyone that I know of, at least during that window of time. And also on Second Amendment related issues, which is extremely important to me. Those are kind of in the non-negotiable area, okay? If the life issue, Second Amendment issue is, to me, kind of just non-negotiable. Those are firm. Some issues are debatable and some are not, but those are two that are, for me, pretty much not debatable. Also was some tax reform. The grocery tax credit that was designed to be a precursor to the elimination of the grocery tax was my legislation, and I'm proud that that legislation has turned into the largest tax cut in the history of the state. And as of now, we're north of $600 million that have been returned to Idaho citizens and taxpayers as a result of that bill. And I believe it's going to lead to an eventual elimination of that tax completely. So that's just a little bit of the background here. And before we just jump into the open forum, I want to just acknowledge there is some good competition in the field that I'm running for. And so part of my job is to do a many month-long job interview, and that's what I'm doing here tonight. I'm interviewing for a job. And part of that role is to try to convince you why me for that job. And I'm going to go back to what I just mentioned just a little bit earlier. I have been blessed with a tremendous amount of life experience in the business world, personally, and with education and with the legislative world. I've been vetted in the sense that if you want to find out what I have done or positions I've taken on just about anything, not just hundreds, but probably thousands of votes are public. It's all public information. You can find it on idaholegislature.org, legislature.idaho.org, and just pull up a topic. And in anywhere from 2005 through 2014, which is the 10 years that I was there, on that topic, find the bills and punch Fulcher in on the little search bar, and you can see where my votes were on certain pieces of legislation on those topics. So I've been vetted on that front. And then I would also mention, I think we have an incredibly encouraging time right now, in that we have a president that is actually engaging, that has turned Washington, D.C. on its ear. Tell you, with that agenda, he's going to have a friend here, okay? I'm not a disciple of any man, and but I will tell you, so my predominant role is to support the interests of you and of Idaho. But I'll tell you, I am so proud of this president. Full disclosure, I was a Ted Cruz delegate. I supported Cruz, and I went to Cleveland as a delegate, and I cast a Cruz vote. And once, of course, he was out, I immediately supported President Trump. I have ever since. But I'll tell you what, I think he's the right guy at the right time. And I think that for those of you who have a faith base, I do. I think that we have been given a reprieve there. And regardless of what you think of the style, regardless of what you think of the tactics, it's effective. And when he sends out a bombastic tweet on something and the media goes scrambling to, futz around with that, while they're over here, he's getting something done over here. Yeah. It's one of those things where I don't have that, I'm going to tell you, I don't have that particular style, and that's not who I am. But I'm telling you, I think I recognize it, and I want you to know that I support that agenda, and I support the President of the United States. And so with that, some of the top things that I would try to jump into very, very quickly is I would want to continue the tax reform. Here, if you didn't know this, because it's not being reported in the media, since Donald Trump was elected, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has jumped more than 30%.
Yep.
And I don't know that people really realize the economic impact that has. And this version of the tax reform bill that has been put forth thus far and passed, it's, I think, step one. It's having a massive impact. And that little company that I dealt with when I was at the startup called Micron, and we were going back and forth from one garage to the other, they just announced within the last week they were going to commit $350 billion with a B dollars back into the U.S. economy with local manufacturing.
Wow.
And folks, this is a fabulous opportunity. And I think for the first time, since, at least in my lifetime, since the Reagan era, there is a potential and a system and an administration that those of us who believe, and I do believe in the free market, and in the power of the citizen over government, and shifting control from government to people, I think there's an incredible opportunity to support that. And there's a window to advance the ball. Instead of playing defense, we can play offense now. And so that's a big part of what I want to try to help and do. There is no question that in the midterm elections that will happen later this year, there is going to be a tighter mix of Republican versus Democrat in the United States Congress. And so every single vote, every single influential person is going to have a big impact. And I think, I'm not totally sure, but I think before this week is over, I'm going to have a meeting with Donald Jr. And it's simply for the reason to say, hey, look, if we're successful, and I think we're going to be, your administration is going to have a support coming out of the state of Idaho. So I want to just mention that to you. A couple of other issues, the healthcare thing, if somebody wants to talk about that more. I was the person who, at least as much as anyone, fought the Obamacare exchange. That will continue. That mandate doesn't belong here. That I believe needs to be in the free market area and also on lands. We are not in control of our destiny in this state because we don't control the dirt under our feet. And until we control, or at least manage, the resource base within our borders, we will not control our own destiny. So all those have more deep discussion, of course, and I'm willing to go further into that. But I want to stop my monologue here, and I just want to I want to learn from you. I want to talk with you. I will reiterate, there is no monopoly on wisdom, and I have certainly some positions and some thought processes and a philosophy on how to do things. But more importantly, I'm from Meridian, okay? It's got a set of issues there. And we're in North Idaho here. And there's a different set of issues here. And I need to be aware of that. And so I'm going to, hopefully you've been thinking about some things, and I just want to open it up to everybody right now and just talk with you and say, what's important to you? What are the things that need to be on my radar? What do I need to learn? And on maybe some of those issues that I just threw out very, very quickly, what's your take on that kind of thing? And so with that, I'm just going to open it up, and I see a hand right there.
This may not be the issue you want to hear, but we have been overwhelmed for years and years and years with politicians. I am not going to vote for a politician. I will vote for a statesman. Do we have any statesmen?
Do any of you remember a United States Senator by the name of Jim McClure? Does anybody remember him? If you're a long-time Idahoan. I see a few hands. Jim McClure was, he's passed now, but he served in the U.S. House in the Idaho State, he served Idaho State Senate too, but he was in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate for a number of years. And ultimately, he was the one who kind of perked my interest in this, and it was kind of by accident that I met him. I used to think I was a basketball player, and I was planning on a basketball scholarship to put me through college. Long story short, I had a knee injury, and that led to a couple of family friends who were World War I veterans who came and talked to me as I had a cast on my leg, and they said, would you be participating in the Boys State American Legion program? Which I did, and eventually that led to the Boys Nations program, which I was elected to, and I met Jim McClure. Okay, so when you say the word statesman, that's who I think of. And for some reason, he kind of took me under his wing. I went back years later as an intern and worked for him there, and he kind of tutored me a little bit. And I saw a very distinct style difference. He never sought the camera. He never sought the microphone. The rare times when it was pushed in his face, he was soft-spoken, probably more so than me, because I'm not that soft-spoken, but he was very respectful, very reverent all the time. And his focus was to build people up, not tear people down. That was the individual most responsible for getting me involved with this. I will commit to you, I am not a lifer in this. I think that potentially God's blessed me with a lot of things in my life right now, and maybe with an open door to serve you. But I adhere to a servant style of leadership, and I'm coming home. I mean, there's a window of time, assuming we succeed, that I'm going to serve, and then I help identify whoever the next person is going to do the same thing. But some of the people that I helped get elected, and I'm not being critical of them, but if you remember names like Sims and Craig and Kempthorne, as a younger person in the business community, I helped them get elected. They never came home. And, you know, became very, very wealthy people because they're part of the system now. And that's my commitment to you. I would rather be poor and live here than be rich and be there for the rest of my life. And so I hope that gives you at least maybe some kind of impression, but that's where I kept my teeth, and that's what I would attempt to try to foster. That's a good point. Don.
Russ, a lot of us who pay attention to what's going on in politics know the influence that the lobbyists have. They have a new name for themselves, but they're still lobbyists. How are you going to avoid the influence of these bloodsuckers that seem to swarm around when you get back there?
Well, it's a very good point. It's an issue that doesn't just happen here. It happens in Boise. And I represented a district it was actually either the largest or the second largest because of the population shift in the state for 10 years there. And I was elected to be Senate leader for the 10 years that I was there. But that environment, I think, Don, is maybe a microcosm of what there is in DC. My nickname, for those who don't follow this really close, was the Ghost. And the reason I was a ghost, and that was my nickname, is because I learned that when you're in those roles, you never have to, if you don't want to, you never have to buy breakfast, lunch, dinner, cocktails, because there is a very well-heeled special interest person or persons who is your best buddy, who will be happy to provide that for you. Well, I had a few benefits. Number one, I figured that out. Number two, I live close enough that my house was 20 minutes from the Capitol and my business office was 15 minutes from the Capitol. So if I wasn't on the Senate floor and if I wasn't in committee, I would slip out a back door or even on occasion a window. And I would disappear, and I was the ghost. And that's because I'm not saying they're not your friends, but they're not your friends, okay? They're paid. And we were having a similar conversation in a previous meeting, and it was Tim Cassidy, who's standing right there, who actually gave me, I think, a fabulous idea on this very topic. And he says, you know what? You should, if you're in DC, you should not, don't subject yourself to that influence, but have Idaho people there, people from Idaho. Well, folks, in this district, there's about 800,000 people, and of that 800,000, I'm willing to bet that over the course of a year or a term, a couple of years, that I could pretty much have, if we worked at it, we could have somebody from Idaho that I could have with me each week, even for a day or two, to be the shadow, to be the accountability factor. Because if you have spent time back there, if you're in Congress or Senate, you have a quasi-entourage with you all the time. And most of that it's that lobby corps because they're building relationships. That's what they do. That's what they're paid to do. I'm not being argumentative about it. It's just how it works. But if those seats are filled and it's people from Idaho and it's people you're serving, there's your accountability tool, or at least one of them. And I know it's probably boring to people who don't like this kind of stuff to go to committee hearings and sit down there and listen to that stuff, but give me 2 days. Give me a day. And plan it out so that in 2 years you can give me a day or give me 2 days and just walk with me, sit with me, talk with me, hold me accountable, be Idaho, okay? I think it's a great idea, and that was Tim's, and the other thing it does is it gives me that level of insulation, and so just keep that in mind if we're successful. I think there's a question here.
Hey, Russ. I'm Captain Alexander. We talked a little bit ago. And regarding the militias, what's your stance on the militias? I realize the media has really painted a bad picture of the militias, 3%ers, especially with the Bundy standoff and the Oregon standoff. That those events that occurred. There's been a lot of corruption involved with the FBI, everybody involved on this, which the truth has finally come out to the American people of what has actually taken place. I'd like to know your position on this as well.
It's a good question, and it's a pretty simple answer. There's a provision for a legitimate position and a calling on that in the Constitution. It's provided for, and ultimately that's the document that we govern ourselves by, or that we should be governing ourselves by. And so I support that. And yes, the militia needs to be called up, and in the state level, that's my understanding is through the governor. But I was a gubernatorial candidate once upon a time, and so I am public on that, and that's a role that I think is a legitimate and righteous one, and that needs to be developed, and it needs to be revered for its position as rightfully authorized through the Constitution. So I support that effort. The National Guard has often been kind of the mindset that that's the replacement for the militia, but it's just that it's the National Guard. And the governor does have some authority over that National Guard. But there's a role, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. And I think that there is a very legitimate role for the militia, and I think that it's in that Constitution for a reason. And I support the proliferation of that. So hopefully that answers your question. In this particular role, I wouldn't have as much direct influence on it as I would in a governor's seat, but hopefully that answers your question. Yes,
Thank you.
Okay, until last night, I did not even know your name. Relatively new to Idaho. So you said you've been in the Senate, the state Senate, for about 10 years, and you left 2014. One, what have you been doing the last 4 years, and why have you decided to, what prompted you to run for Congress?
I never stopped doing what I was doing. I was in the tech sector until I got into the Senate, and then I started a commercial real estate business. So I'm a real estate broker that specializes in commercial type property and in industrial. And so most of my time personally and how I pay the bills is recruiting certain types of businesses, commercial type businesses into Idaho in various areas. And to give you just a feel for that, right now there is a manufacturing company that has engaged with me to identify a 40-acre piece of property someplace in the state of Idaho. They have a small manufacturing business. They need about 400 employees. And so I'm out in my other life, and I try to identify the optimum place for that to be, where it's a good fit for the community, good fit for the company, and then I try to promote our state with business development on that front. So that's how I make a living. Thankfully, I have a 24-year-old son who is very, very bright, who got licensed in the same business recently that allowed me to do this and keep the wheels on the bus in that business. But that's how I pay the bills, and that's what I've done since 2005. Yes?
I'm sort of new here too, but I've lived in places where generally the congressional district maybe covers a county or two, and here it's from Nevada all the way up
To Canada.
And my impression has been that the South is a little bit different from up here in the Panhandle. Is it hard in your experience to balance the needs of both the South in the north, or is it a tough negotiation?
It's really insightful, actually, and huge difference. But there's a whole bunch of common denominators. As you migrate further south, you get down to Hawaii County, for example, which borders Nevada on the south. Hawaii County is 83% federally owned. And so there's a cattle ranching business that is predominantly the industry in that region. But the BLM is a huge issue in Hawaii County, okay? Let's migrate north to closer to where we are. Guess what? It's still predominantly federally owned. It's not the BLM, but it's the Forest Service, or it's some kind of regulation that has to do with EPA or endangered species, something like that. There's still federal regulation that comes with it. And so, although the interest is significantly different, the cause is the same. And so it's a federal overreach, or it's a federal relationship that we're subject to. So there's a lot of commonality. Then you take it to a whole nother level, and if it comes to a healthcare issue, an immigration issue, or a tax issue, that's uniform, top to bottom. Everybody has very similar concerns on that front. So extremely insightful question, but what I've learned substantiates what I believe and operate as a state senator, which is over the course of time, that pendulum of control has swung such that the federal, formerly known as the general government, has way more control than it was originally intended to have. And that pendulum needs to be pushed back this way. And so that's one of the reasons why I was in this race before President Trump was elected. But I can tell you, I'm really encouraged by the fact that I didn't think I was going to have a Trump to be able to work with. And so my encouragement level has gone up. And so there is a very significant difference, but there's a lot of commonality. And it's really insightful that you picked up on that. It's very true, but it's very interesting. Yes?
I'm very concerned about corruption in Washington and what's coming out with the FBI and the Department of Justice. And one of the things that to me was the epitome of the corruption was when Michelle Obama took 800 of her closest friends on vacation to Spain, and during the previous administration, at the cost for the taxpayers of, what was it, $5-6 million. I mean, it was ridiculous that I paid that much for her to go on vacation. And I would be very interested in legislation. To me, it was just totally out of hand. It was Marie Antoinette telling us to eat cake. And I would want my representative to introduce legislation to limit the abuses for future administrations of squandering the public funds for their entertainment. So.
Yeah, that would take a number of different forms, okay? And you know, it's unfortunately, it probably goes a lot deeper than just in the executive branch. I know it does. You know,
right.
it's in all those branches, and so. That legislation you're talking about probably takes a number of different forms. There's probably a budgetary approach, there's an ethics approach, and I'm just going to fight that and file it away in the sense that good counsel, what's the best way to do it? I don't know that I can give you the answer on that, but I get the point, I agree with the point, and if to the extent I can have an influence on that for accountability's sake, I'm a taxpayer too. Right. And so I get it and I agree with you.
And we're 20 trillion in debt.
And we're
20 nobody seems to care.
If I can just take that last comment and just maybe put a couple things in perspective. The state of Idaho, you will hear over and over again, including a couple weeks ago when my friend, the governor, did his State of the State. Talked about a balanced budget in the state of Idaho. Folks, it is true that the dollars that we receive approximately match the dollars that we spend as a state government. But what's not well known is that of that pie of dollars, between 36 and 37% of them come from the federal government. And that federal government is the $20 trillion in debt source. So you might think, all right, why is that? And it goes back to a previous point we talked about. It's because we don't control our resource base.
Right.
It's because the lands are owned by the federal government for the most part. And so they pacify us by saying, okay, we're gonna give you grants. We're gonna give you PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. We're going to
6 cents an acre.
we're gonna subsidize your budget because we realize it's federally owned and you can't, property tax or that kind of thing. Well, that sounds on the surface, that might sound pretty cool. Because for every dollar that we put in to the federal government budget, we get about $1.35, $1.37, something like that back. It's not good. It's really bad. And here's why. Every single one of those dollars comes with strings attached. If you ever wonder how certain things that really don't match our value system get passed in this state, think about things like Common Core. Think about things like the Obamacare exchange. It's not because it's mandated, it's because the federal government says, if you don't do it, we're not gonna give you your money. So ultimately, that has to change. And it's a really fascinating story how it got to be this way. If you take a look at a map of the United States, Colorado East, for the most part, there's almost no federal land. But Colorado to the west is mostly federal land. The whole trigger point happened in about the Civil War era. And so the Constitution didn't change, but if you were a member of the Union prior to the Civil War, you became the owner of and the manager of the land with your borders. But if you became a state or member of the Union after that, you didn't. They changed their policy for two reasons. Number one, there was a fear at the time that the South, the recently defeated South, may rise again in the West. And they didn't want to cede control of the land in case there could be another civil war. Reason number two, guess what? Gold and silver was found in them Bar Hills. And the federal government wanted to maintain that resource base. The argument was, and probably legitimate at the time, to repay itself for the cost of the war and take that out of debt. But the policy was changed. It was supposed to be temporary, and it was to be eventually, after the debt was paid, ceded back to the states once they became members of the Union. Well, guess what? The debt for the Civil War has been paid for some time, but yet we still don't have control of those lands, so that opens up a whole other thing. I just want to say, we have such incredible wealth here. Incredible wealth. Ronald Reagan used to say America was a great natural athlete because it had everything. It had the resources, it had the natural physical strength, it had the human resources, the natural resources, the space, anything you can imagine. That's Idaho. Idaho is a great natural athlete. But we don't have control of our destiny because we don't control our resources. And it's actually a little bit worse than it sounds, because not only is 62% of the resource base restricted, because once we can't control it, that generally means you don't touch it. But there's also some state land. But then you take on top of that and you add EPA regulations, and you add endangered species regulations, and those types of things. Folks, we are operating on an absolute fraction of the wealth that God gave us, okay?
Exactly.
It's a fraction. And so if I can make an analogy, we got a 4-cylinder Pinto that is driving this state when there is a turbocharged V8 under the hood, okay? We are starving to death in a room full of food. We have the natural gas, we have timber, we have mining, we have the molybdenum, we've got, you name it, silver, we got water.
Right.
That's the lifeblood, okay? But yet, for the most part, we're restricted from it. And so, and I'm sorry for just going on, but here's the good news, okay? It's gonna change. It will change, and here's why. That control of the land is going to shift. I'm not gonna say ownership, but I'm gonna say control, and here's why. I just explained to you that Idaho is a do-me state. In other words, we get more money back than we put in. But the eastern states are just the reverse. So if you're in New Hampshire or Connecticut or Rhode Island or New York or whatever, you put that dollar in, you only get 60 cents back. Okay? Well, guess who's losing their sense of humor about subsidizing the West? The eastern states are wise enough to this. And they're starting to put a stake in the ground and say, hey, wait a minute here. If we put a buck into the federal kitty, we want a buck back in services. I am telling you, and I see this more and more of the time. I started experience this as a state senator. I've been going back and forth to DC. I'm going there again tomorrow. And it's growing. The battle for lands is going to be fought and won in the East. Okay?
Really?
And this is going to happen. I can't tell you when, but it's going to happen because they will simply not put up with what they believe is just strictly a subsidy, and it is. And we're not prepared for it because we're not planning for it. All the stakeholders need to be at the table. The access needs to be open, but it's coming. I'm telling you, and that's something else that I want to throw a spotlight on, try to do some planning for, and also just put some wisdom into it because we've got massive resources, much more than most people realize, and it's all renewable in the sense that if we're wise, we can have it all. We can have our access. We can have our sportsmen, our outdoorsmen, and the recreation, and at the same time, stop doing these 800,000 acre burns every year. Where we're kicking, more carbon into the atmosphere in a single year than every car from LA to New York. And so it's exciting, but we have to embrace that, and that's another issue, and I really got wound up off that.
One last important question I'd like to bring up. What can you take to Congress to help put a stop to these illegal seizures of lands from the ranchers? One of the things that we're facing here in America, I was just at the Bundy event over in Paradise, Montana, and the amount of land seizures happening across America where the federal government is going in, even burning the ranches, killing off the cattle, burying them. This kind of corruption needs to stop in America. And I don't know if you have followed the Bundy stories very much.
Oh yeah.
Anyone that hasn't needs to. But this is something I would like to see also taken to our President of the United States regarding the Bundys. I'd like for the President to ask for a complete, full investigation done with what took place to them.
Yeah, it needs to happen.
It does.
It does need to happen.
I see Fox News all the time talking about all the corruption with the FBI and everything else involved, but never once have I seen anyone talk to the President regarding this kind of corruption with like the Bundys and stuff. And they're just one of so many that things are happening to here in America. And somewhere along the line, this has got to stop.
Yeah. I got invited to go to the cattlemen in Hawaii County. We were talking about Hawaii County a few minutes ago. Invited me to Oriana here a few weeks back, and I get her to do it again, I think in March. But they invited me to just come to their semi-annual meeting. And I don't know if you've ever been to Oriana, but GPS doesn't work, and and I think there's 3 buildings, but we met in the church, and it was packed, and I'll tell you, I got an education like you cannot believe. Here are families that have been there for hundreds of years, and the numbers have dwindled because the constraints, mainly through BLM, has restricted those lands and, more importantly, cut off the water. Right. It's redirected the water supply. And so they've been choked to death, okay, basically, with the whole thing. And I'm a farm kid, so I get part of that, but I haven't done the ranching thing for a long period of time, and so that mentality is such that, hey, look, you know what? We're being strangled to death, and so we're ready to fight. I mean, that's because we're gonna die anyway, and so we're ready to fight. The Bundys were not crystal clean, okay? I mean, they had some issues, but the way that was handled was entirely out of line. And I might add one other thing, just because I do believe that the federal government was formed to serve the states, not the other way around, okay? There was an opportunity, there were several missed opportunities there. There was a county sheriff that missed an opportunity. There was a governor that missed an opportunity. There was a congressional delegation that missed an opportunity, okay? The federal government should have never been allowed to roll in there with basically a military operation and try to take that thing over. And so I do hear what you're saying, and I'm sympathetic to that. To the extent I can be a mouthpiece or an influence in that sense, I will do that. But it also plays back into the other part of our conversation with the lands. Those do need to be, those of us in this room, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna bet on you before I'm gonna bet on somebody in Washington DC on how to best manage the resource base under our feet here. And there are a lot of people who push back on me on that, and there might be some here that do, but I'm just telling you, that's where my head is. I believe that was the intent, and that's what I'm gonna try to encourage. And somebody who hasn't asked a question, yes?
Okay. My question goes along with his. I'm originally from Harney County.
Okay.
And grazing rights, water rights. I remember back in '93, there was a saying around cattle free in '93.
Wasn't right, what?
Cattle free in '93.
Yeah, oh yeah, cattle free
That was
93,
a
yeah.
huge agenda to
Yeah.
get the cattle off the land. And I'm with him. It's like, can you please make it one of your focuses to be a heartfelt thing to bring our lands back to us? We still have the Hammonds, Stephen and Dwight Hammond, who are still in prison for the second time. Wrongly. We had UN troops in Harney County.
Yeah.
And I live here now, I'm thankful to be in a conservative state. But my hometown is in a mess. It tore people to shreds. People that have been there forever. And so I would like to see someone with a heart, and apparently you come in from pretty much the area I come from, lots of family around the Caribbean, and you're a farm boy, you understand a lot of that. And I hope that that will be a part of your heart, is to represent all of us that way. I don't know if Idaho has as much problem with that as the Oregon area that I came from.
I got a visit, after that meeting with the cattlemen, I got a visit from the Hanley family. Once again, Owyhee County, and they came to me, and it's by the grace of God that it was Bundy versus Hanley, because of a very similar thing, in Idaho, okay, so very similar situation. And they're in a lawsuit, have been for about 20 years. But, so I hear what you're saying, and I am empathetic to that. I would like to tell you that Idaho is as conservative as you might think, but it's not. We have a lot of folks who, I believe, kind of talk the talk but don't necessarily walk the walk, and that's where you start getting into trouble. But I do commit to you that I do understand the importance of those lands, and whoever controls the lands control their destiny. I mean, that's just how, whoever controls the resource base controls your destiny. And we're doing reasonably well on the 10 or 12% of the resource base we have. But imagine if that resource base was what it's supposed to be. I literally had almost a, well, it was a very, very confrontational interaction with our Director of Commerce, because a few months ago, they came out with this big press release that Idaho has this fabulous 4% unemployment rate, or whatever. To which I immediately wrote an op-ed, and I shot it all over the state that says, yeah, but 22% of our citizens are on some kind of public assistance. So we might have a fabulous number of jobs if you want to work at Starbucks, okay? But if you want to feed your family, we have the second lowest income per capita of any state in the nation. Why is that? It's because our resource jobs are gone. We're not, our sawmills aren't running. Our manufacturing plants have been shipped overseas. Even our ag, which is still the engine of this state, has been greatly restricted because of one regulation or another. Folks, we have a resource base that's that engine. And there's one other thing that I have to bring up here that is so incredibly exciting, and it's natural gas. And just pure raw crude oil. And a lot of people don't think we have that. There is, and I've jumped into this deeply. In fact, to the point where I took advantage of a program that legislators were automatically admitted to pay for it, but I got a certificate in energy management through the University of Idaho that took me through this process of learning. We have got enough natural gas in 2 counties, Washington and Fayette counties, to fuel this entire nation, for about 50 years, okay? Just in 2 counties. Imagine the entire nation, okay? And that's just with the technology we have today. And so, and it's even better, because Washington and Fayette counties, if you take a look at the map, sit right on top of the Williams pipeline that goes from Alaska to Texas. You can throw a rock and hit the pipeline already there, okay? It's like Christmas from God on steroids. And it's like, all you gotta do is just be wise with it. And so, yeah, this is really cool, but we gotta do something about it. Yes, ma'am.
Question, and I don't know if it's something you can do anything about. We go camping a lot, and they let that cedar forest up the North Fork burn, and it was old growth, beautiful trees, and now they're just letting them sit there and rot. And why don't they use that wood? I don't understand.
Government wasteful.
I'm with you.
I don't understand. To me, it's stupid. It's like
well, and you know, but here's maybe some hope, okay?
And why did they let it burn? I mean, why didn't they fight it?
Yeah, I think the short answer is there are certain so-called environmental interests that sue all the time that create tremendous hurdles for industry in doing something wise with that. But I'll go back to a comment I made just a little bit earlier. There's a conundrum, because when you don't take care of that, it's fuel load, and it burns. Yes. And if a lightning strike hits it, guess who's kicking the carbon into the atmosphere? Okay.
And all these people out of work that could be working in the forest could be doing something and earning the money for their kids and families.
Keep it from being diseased, and just make it healthy.
Yes.
Just simply healthy. And so I'm willing to have that debate, and I'm willing to have that debate with those who claim to be part of some of those environmental concerns, including with cattle ranching, by the way. If you're wise, then you're also improving your environment. You're improving the ecosystem, because God gave us a mind to go with the resource base, and if you take care of it and you keep it healthy, it's just better. And so, Dan.
We all get discouraged, and what we've been through the last 7 years has been hard on all of us. But we're not in a situation like you are, where it's 3 or 4 times a day that you're dealing with this. What keeps you centered? I mean, do you feel like God's helping with this, or where does that come from with you? Because I can't imagine doing it myself.
You probably could, because I know you. And but you know, for me, I do have a strong faith base, and I am an evangelical Christian, and Lord Jesus Christ is my Savior, and I'm not embarrassed to say that, and I say it frequently. But if it was, that's the balance point for me. That's the foundation for my decisions, and I can also tell you, I fall on my face all the time. Okay, I got plenty of warts, but I attempt to use those guidelines as the principles for right and wrong, and that's the lens that I look through the world for. And with some of the confrontational things that we face, honestly, I don't know how people do it without a faith base. I don't know how, you remain encouraged, right? Maybe that's why we have an opioid crisis. Maybe that's why we have so many addictions. I don't know, but for me, Dan, that's kind of that balancing point. The other thing is that through absolutely no credit to myself, I've got a wife that has been an encouragement to me and has put up with all the stuff that I've done and continues to encourage. And you know what? A lot of people don't have that. And then thankfully, again, through no real work of my own, I got 3 kids that I can just crow like crazy because they're fabulous kids. And that's my encouragement, and that's kind of what keeps me centered. And I kind of just feel like maybe, just maybe, some of the experiences God gave me over this course of time with life, with education, and with legislative stuff, that maybe I could take that servant attitude and a little bit of the drive that I got to try to push some of these things forward. And that's what I hope to be able to do for a period of time. But thanks you for that question. Yes, sir.
Along the lines of the previous question on lobbyists, what's your viewpoint on piggyback or rider legislation?
Piggyback or rider is, okay, I think I understand what you're talking about. It was about legislation that's got multiple things in it.
They have a main bill and then they pack in bills underneath it to ride through on the main bill. Right,
and so there is a real big issue because one of the good things about Idaho, for example, in Idaho legislature, we have what's called a single subject rule. And what that generally means is, for the most part, if you have a piece of legislation you want to run, it has to be on one topic. Sometimes by default, depending on the subject matter, others are involved, but it has to be on one topic. Not the case nationally. Most of the bills, certainly the big ones, are you use the word piggyback, I'll use the word omnibus, which means you got several things in that bill. And so when you vote on it, or when you go out and you're promoting or discouraging a piece of legislation, you always have to weigh, does the good outweigh the bad? Does the bad outweigh the good? Is there an earmarking in there that goes to the state of Missouri for this bridge or whatever, okay? I know that this is a frequently fought battle in the United States Congress, but it really needs to go to a single subject rule because if you take Jim Risch or Mike Crapo or Raul Labrador or Mike Simpson and you want to go paint them in a really good light or a really bad light, you can do exactly that with the same piece of legislation because there is good stuff and there's bad stuff in every piece of legislation. And depending on your priority, they're in a situation where they have to vote, and I would be in a situation where I have to cast my vote on weighing the scales. In my opinion, it needs to be single subject, and to the extent I could be in that camp and support it, I would.
There's several countries that drive down because it leaves open the door for so much.
It does, and paybacks and all that stuff that goes with it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. My philosophy about politics is, as much as we follow the news, I'm not going to be shooting you off a message on every single item you're going to vote on or everything I think and feel about. So I need to cast my vote for people who I understand and believe in their core and who I trust, frankly, because I'm just not going to I'm not going to micromanage everything that you're going to vote on, okay? So to that end, in light of the fact that you set up a framework of this conversation like a job interview, would you share with us, during your legislative career, what has been your greatest success and why you feel that way about it? And what has been your greatest failure or disappointment?
That's easy.
And what did you learn from it?
That's easy. On a great success, I championed the parental consent legislation for life that, heaven forbid if you're an emancipated minor lady and you're pregnant and you want to go get an abortion, you can do that. Prior to this legislation, without any parental consent. You couldn't go to your school nurse and get an aspirin without parental consent, but you could go get an abortion without parental consent. So we got that passed, and I feel really good about that. And I know that there has been a direct impact on life as a result of that. And so that's one that I feel very good about. The other one was the grocery tax credit because it had a fiscal impact that's been second to none in this state. So that's the high points. My biggest disappointment was in about 2007. I was a relatively new state senator, and some people from Minnesota or Michigan, one of those two states, came to me with a piece of legislation called the American Law for American Courts and said, we want you to run this because we have a fear that there are certain cultures that might want to operate on different law than American law in this nation. And I looked at that at the time. Remember, you got to go back to 2007 in my defense. We didn't have some of this. And I said, guys, I think you got a solution in search of a problem here. Our legal system is so arrogant, they're not going to put up with any of this. What I didn't realize is there are certain cultures who will formulate and they don't want to assimilate with Americans.
Right.
And so they'll operate within their own legal system. I didn't run that bill. I should have run that bill. I missed it. I didn't see it. And I think, actually, this year we're going to rectify that. I'm still heavily involved with legislative stuff. I know a few people, let's put it that way. And I'm really close to that. And so I think we're going to get that resolved. But that was, in hindsight, if I knew then what I know now, I would have run that, and I think we got it passed, and that would have been in place. So hopefully that's
Thank you. Thanks for coming. My name is Sean. I've been here in Idaho for quite a while, and I just realized listening to your preface of where you've worked on the question that I've had for quite a while that I've been trying to work in my avenues. I remember reading about the Micron. I remember looking through a magazine called Computer Shopper when it was about the size of the New York phone book, way back in the late 80s or 90s. Anyhow, we seem to have an infringement upon our rights, and what I see as a Fourth Amendment constitutional right, our greatest resource is myself. And what is the possibility with your background? I don't expect you to be a technical guy, but you've been in the field, you know the lingo, you've heard people talking about things, that the node, everything is based off metadata. Everything about all of us is metadata. The node that they try to base it all around is me. That's me. I should have rights for that node. And there are just societies of businesses and things that are blowing up in this country, and this information's being given. It kind of comes back to where you said the pendulum has to go the other way for us to have the freedoms over ourselves. Up here in North Idaho, I don't need a whole lot. I need to care for my wife. If I see stuff on TV and it's getting to me, I can turn that off. I can turn off the radio. I have a choice not to read magazines or the newspaper, but the information that they're gathering on me and storing in databases is mine. That's my right. What can be done about that?
So,
that's a big open, I know there's a lot to it.
Got about a week. But a couple things. One of the things that kind of got mandated on me, I was a business guy. I did my grad and undergrad in the business world, but when at a certain point in Micron, the CEO at the time, if you're going to be a director level person, you need to go do a double E course. And so I did get a chance to go through that. So I technically have the engineering training. My engineering skills about here. Finman is about here. Okay. So, but I get the concept and I understand. And I got to look at this in terms of kind of like what the premise is, okay?
Well,
The
and
whole-
the government's taken all this information. We had Jade Helm 16, where they had all these scenarios, and it was to see how this node communicates with that node, which communicates with that node. But that node is me.
Yeah.
And they're owning this information. I want to see some way of that node, I can take ownership inalienably. That's me. That is my right.
So we got a couple things going on right now. First of all, our student data is being bought and sold and shipped all over, right? And that's one issue. And by the way, that's going to be coming up in this legislative session here. Just, but it's data on students in this case, and it's the misuse of that data. Not to segue too much, but that's one of the reasons why I support the school choice model so much, is because it gives parents the ability to have some decision over that. On a little bit higher level, and the amount of information the government has on us. There is a cost of freedom. And that cost of freedom may infringe on what some people would argue to be safety, okay? I can't tell you exactly where that line is. I don't have a good way to measure that, but I do have a concern like you do that, wait a minute, if the NSA is listening to this conversation, well, thank you, because you're the only part of government that's listening, okay? Fine.
Amen.
But I don't want you listening, and I don't need you listening. And if I can turn your hearing aid off, I'm gonna do everything in my power to do it, okay? But I want them listening outside those borders, and I want that border secure, and I want to try to draw those lines so that we have a level of protection. I don't have a good answer beyond that. And if you, honestly, this is one of those areas where, man, I can take some counsel. If you can help me define where that line is and how to try to protect, at the same time, keep
I think the thought of
our
this is
freedom.
in its infancy, and it's just gonna grow and swell, but we need to talk about it, and that's why I brought it forward. Not that you're gonna have some hallelujah information
Yeah.
that they're giving, but it needs to be a debate, and we need to talk about it.
It's a really good one, and part of it is, I don't know, because I don't have privy to the information, I don't know what they're doing. I mean, other than, you mentioned the metadata, I went and shopped for a set of Danner boots about 3 months ago online, and every time I log on, it pops up the same set of boots that I already bought. And that's kind of spooky.
Right.
Before we go, let's make some contact, and I could use some counsel. That's a great topic, and man, I don't know how to define that. So,
Russ, we do 2 more questions, and maybe we can just have you mingle around.
okay, so let's do a couple more. I think this gentleman had.
Sure.
Here.
How can we help?
Thanks for that. If what you hear tonight is something that you think is something you can support, if what I talk about and who you see in this job interview, because I'm doing a job interview, guys, if what you see is somebody you would consider hiring, I would ask for a number of things. First of all, I would ask for your prayers. For those of you who have faith, I don't discriminate against those who don't have faith. That's fine. But for those of you who have faith, just give me a prayer. And not just me, but our leadership. Pray for our president and those who are making decisions around him. He has got a thick skin, but he's human, okay? So I would ask for prayers for those who are of faith. Secondly, I think Clinton's got oh, by the way, this is Clinton Daniel, by the way. And Clinton, I should have introduced him right out of the gate. Clinton is my field director. He coordinates all our volunteer stuff and our networking, and he's based out of Lewiston, but he's traveled with me and he works his tail off, and he's got a little sign-in sheet, and if you're willing to put your name down, that data collection is used. I do collect that data.